This is a Rutke Mods video. Hello, I'm Greg Rutke of Rutke Mods, and welcome to episode 16 of my Mac Pro series. In this episode, I will be showing you how a Mac Pro 2.1 spec Pro can game in Windows environment by testing two games, GTA 5 and Doom, on this system using both a 2GB GTX 950 from EVGA, which is the FTW, overclocked a conservative 100 megahertz, and a GTX 960 from EVGA, which is the SSC or super clocked edition card, which has been overclocked by 50 megahertz. I will be showing you just the benchmarks for the 960, but I will be showing you the results of the 950, which I currently have installed. The 960 has a 4GB video RAM in it, where the 950 only has a 2. And that comes into play with systems that like to bottleneck a lot. The GPU running through the PCIe 1.1 bus will have problems getting info in and out of the system, and with today's games, it uses a lot of video buffer, which is used by the video RAM. The CPU will help bottleneck everything, so having extra video RAM is actually very important for a system like this, and a 960 does not cost much more than a 950 on Newegg. $40, $50 if that. And it's a worthwhile investment if you get the 4GB version. So I will come back after all my benchmarks are finished, and I will show you the end results with this 950, and then I'll come back and show you real time how the system performs with the 960s. Anyway, let's get started. So I've decided to start with the 960 so you can just see the performance, and then I'll end the video with the specs and setup that the 950 went through and the timing for that. Anyway, here's the specs of the 960. It's a 4GB from EVGA. It's the super clocked, and it has been overclocked by a moderate 50 megahertz. Anyway, let's begin by showing you the benchmark for 3D Mark's Firestrike. Here are the end results of the Firestrike test. I decided not to film it because everyone knows what that looks like. We made a 5,689, which isn't the best a 960 can do, but that's because of the CPU bottleneck and the PCIe bottlenecks. Still, it's a very good score for such an old machine, and since we're playing at 1080p, it's not too bad. And in fact, it's still playable. And I'll be showing you further into this video that this machine can still perform quite well at everything you can throw at it. Before I continue, I would like to tell you that I'm going to try a picture-in-picture video and show you all the specs that are on this screen too. This computer, like I said in an earlier video, it's good to have at least 4 cores on one CPU, and you'll see why. Usually most games will only use 2 to 4 cores, but on systems like this, it appears to try to spread all its work across all 8 cores, which is pretty neat. Anyway, so I'm going to be running the benchmark on here and showing you the benchmark while the data is shown in the other screen. This is the recommended setup from GeForce Experience. For the 960. Let's begin the benchmark. well, that is the end of the benchmark. Now keep in mind, with that benchmark we were averaging around 40 frames per second. That is not just because of a bottleneck. That is because I am running the recommended settings from the GeForce Experience for the 960, which is much higher than the 950. If you ran the 960 with the 950 settings, we would be getting over 60 frames per second. Where at the end of the video you'll be seeing big frame rate differences for GTA 5, but that's only because I kept the settings at the max possible for each card. And at the end of the video you'll see the 950 can hold its own in GTA 5. In fact, the 950 is pretty darn powerful and could work in this system, but that would only be for GTA 5. It plays very smoothly and almost flawlessly, except for occasional split-second pause in the game, and it's unplayable at nighttime with a heavy downpour in the game. It's like a slideshow, where with the 960 you don't have that problem. Now, your next question is, can it play Doom? And yes, it can. Quite well, in fact. Oh, you didn't mean this Doom. You meant this Doom. Can it play this? Yes, it can. Welcome to Doom. Now I show the settings that I am running on the 950 videos towards the end of the video, so I'm not showing them right now. But I mentioned in that video that I can't run the GeForce Experience settings, so this is just default settings that I have tweaked to make it run great. I also have VSync enabled because you can't play on a Apple Cinema display like a normal gaming monitor, and there's a lot of tearing without VSync enabled. So you'll notice that the frames per second in the corner will probably always stay around 60, and this shows you just how good this game runs. And if I wanted to turn VSync off, we'd probably be running somewhere around 70 or 80 frames per second, but we'll just be running with VSync on, and you'll see just how good this game plays with a 960. It definitely plays a lot better than the 950. Let's begin.
Demonic presence at unsafe levels. Lockdown in effect.
Now in this part with the 950, it's barely playable. The 950 just can't keep up with this, and inside it's just really slow and will make you sick. If you notice here, we are still keeping around 50 frames per second with all this activity.
Demonic presence at unsafe levels. Lockdown in effect.
In fact, with the 950, this is nearly impossible to play inside. Outside, it plays fairly decent, but it's got a lot of slowdown in it. And that's not just because of the 950, it's also because of the lack of video RAM, which 2 gigabytes is a lot for today's games if you have a fast computer. But you need more than 2 gigabytes for today's games with all these bottlenecks that are included here. And sorry for my poor gameplay. It's hard to hold the camera and play at the same time.
I'm willing to take full responsibility for the horrible events of the last 24 hours, but you must understand. Our interest in their world was purely for the betterment of mankind. Everything has clearly gotten out of hand now, yes. But it was worth the risk, I assure you.
With the 950, we have gotten a 561 in 3D Mark's Firstrike test for 1080p. We averaged 34 and 29 frames per second for 1 and 2's tests, and the physics score was 25 frames per second, which is a CPU-based test. You really can't do a whole lot about that. And the combined score, even though it looks bad, was roughly 7.5 frames per second. But actually that's not too bad considering how intensive this test is. Here's the 950's GeForce Experience optimized graphics settings, which I'll be running the benchmark on. Here is the 950's settings for Doom, which will be playing in Vulkan graphics. Of course, you can't set up GeForce Experience's settings on this game because Doom does not support the CPU. But it will still play greatly. Okay, so here's the beginning of the roundup. Keep in mind that GTA 5, even though it looks like the 960 lost this battle, it didn't. The graphic settings are much higher on the 960 than the 950, and there's never any slowdown. The 950 slows down a lot on occasion. Also, if you were running the 960 at the 950 settings earlier in the video, you would be getting way past 60 frames per second, probably towards the 70s, maybe 80s. Also, this video series is for you to be able to get the best bang for your buck and buy a Mac and use it for many different things. But if you got a better card like a 970 or even a 980, you would be always past 60 frames per second and averaging at least 70 something, maybe even more. And here's the results for Doom. Keep in mind I had to have VSync enabled to play on this monitor. If I had used my gaming monitor, for instance, I would have gotten higher frame rates per second for the 960. The 950 probably wouldn't have changed at all, looking at the average number. Anyway, that's it for this episode. And in episode 17, I will determine what will happen whenever it happens. But right now, I don't really have a plan for it just yet. But there will be an episode 17. And just hang on for that. Anyway, thank you for watching. And this has been a Rutk Mods video.